Thank you for the nice words. Before I begin, let me thank Professor Sarfaraj, who is an old friend, and Department of Geography, Banaras Hindu University, Head Professor Tripathi, and the colleagues. Coming back to Banaras, somehow still, it's nothing called like the homecoming, but I still feel that I'm still here, because the kind of warmth that I receive from colleagues, both teaching and non-teaching, make me feel that I was always welcome till I was here. And that's something always a cherished moment to carry on. It is good that unimportant things are not recorded. No, but the fact remains that I really enjoy the moments spent here and still continuing that. So thank you, Professor Sarfaraj, for having me here. I thought that I will talk about this, the book, the work that I did on Banaras after leaving Banaras. In the morning, colleagues were saying that people who work on Banaras should live in Banaras. My considered opinion when I was teaching in Banaras that I will not work on Banaras, and that is why the reason is that I always tell my students that should be sufficient distancing from the subject that you study. Else, your own perspective becomes the perspective of the people, and your own gauge becomes the public gauge. So it's a methodological challenge that I try to maintain. And then when I left Banaras, then I realized that now I should work on Banaras. And then we did a project on Banaras, and the book that your friend has read is half-titled here, The Heterotopia in Making, and I have prefixed a title, Sacred Banaras. Why sacred? I will come at the end of the presentation. But let me put the context that I want to discuss. Basically, I am trying to see that there could be multiple ways that one views at the city. One can look at the city as visionary city, the vision for, say, 22nd century, or vision for the AI city, vision for, quote-unquote, whatever name that you want to put it. But there also is a possibility that cities are increasingly exclusionary city. What it is, we, from a different vantage point where we stand, we choose that what city we see. The same thing can be seen multiple ways. And that's what I have thought to discuss with you, that what we do. If you look at the urban literature, which I have no interest and no intention to getting into, but then you will see that there are hierarchies of cities that one would talk about. So you have the NLT at a global level, New York, London, Tokyo. Then you have the other cities which decides. In India, you will have Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore. And then you will have cities like Banaras, Indore, Ujjain. And then the cities like Gazipur, Bulandshahr. And then you name the cities, there would be more than 5,000 within our own country. In terms of population criteria, they will surpass all European cities, because they will always have a lower threshold of population. Does that really matter? Is that end of the world? There are other ways to look at the city in terms of polarization. The cities are most polarized spaces that we see these days. In terms of gated communities, slums, if you want to put in that, you want to look at it in terms of the political polarization, if you look at the religious, ethnic, you name the criteria and you will find the polarization. Depending upon your own choice, our own choice, that we can do it. That's how we look at it. But we can also look at cities like neoliberal city making, that how even the traditions, spirituality, religion could be seen in a context of corporatization. There are literature available, one can look at it if one wants. Definitely, I am not going into the privatization of services, and definitely that how one would look at. So how we make identity of a city. And this, which I thought that I will connect with the theme that we are going to do for 5 days. So when map a street, you can map a city, you have all done those classical classification of functional classification of city, morphological classification of city, they are all identity ultimately. We look at industrial city, we look at religious city, military city, you name it. Similarly, when you will come and at the end of the presentation of your own work, you will try to name your own city. How do we do that? How do we identify it? What becomes the dominant practice or process on the basis of which we will identify a particular street, a particular locality, particular mohalla, particular city. You name it. Indian villages have been named on the basis of caste. Pandepur. I don't want to give you the examples. Just you refresh your memory, you will see it. What those nomenclature comes. But this nomenclature gives a sense of identity for those who are not living there. Like for Banaras, I will come to that definitely in the second part, but let me first discuss what it is. So it could be material basis, like you have Loha Mandi in the own city. Definitely, I don't need to tell you what happens there. Everybody understands what happens there. But then there are cultural practices on the basis of which you can identify a particular street, like Las Vegas, where you have the casinos for the night. That's a process of economic generation, financial districts, whether in New York or elsewhere. The financial district tells you a process that it is functional, or a commercial town, or a commercial capital of India. We know the process that we are. So there is an identity attached with a certain criteria. Or one can definitely look in terms of the economic and social processes, which again will give you the different, a particular economic activity, or a particular caste, particular religion, particular, like we always know about white neighborhood, black neighborhood. People who are interested can look at the book like Harlem. Itself there is a book. It's a black neighborhood in the city of New York. You can read it about, and it tells you that what happens there. Or definitely that. But is it that identity really matters? Morning people have talked about Banaras and then saying that one identity is ki ye Sankar ke Trishul pe basa hai. Fair enough. But is that the only identity that the city has? Yesterday I was telling to my friend that the city is one of the most oldest trade capital of the city, of the country. It connects north and south. And that's the reason that you have the Loha Mandi or say Gola Dinanath, you name it, Kodai Chowki, you have the electronics separate, you have the spices separate, you have metal work separate. Why so much of what we call the specialization in terms of commodity production or a commodity trade? Where do you get a specialization? Do we get in your Kasba town? Do you get it in your district town? Do we get at a global level? When we say that automobile hub of the world, on the classical board tells you where it is, where it was rather. Relocation. So what basically is that, but does that mean that only that happens in the city? So within a particular unit, there would be more than one dominant practice. So when you will map the street tomorrow, see that what you capture. The dominant voice or the what we call subaltern practices. We will see that at the end of your workshop. That what we capture out of the 60 streets that we map. The dominant identity or the identities that exist in that. We have the mosaic of it. I'm not sure what we will do, but we will do something. So if I create a binaries, those of you are interested in binaries, I have created. So we could be having the identity on the basis of symbols, imaginaries, myths. That is the one kind of identity that one can create. But you can also create an identity based on material practices. Like the religious town or a military town doesn't have only the cantonment, but they also have the educational centers. Look at the Indian military towns. They have brilliant center of education for whatever reason. What is our identity that we give it? Or for that matter, the religious towns. Like say Ujjain, consistently coming at a clean city in terms of the government ranking for the probably the last was yes, or Indore comes saying you name the, but does that the only identity that it happens? Does the cleanest city in India have the filth or a garbage? Or the smart cities in India, does they have the poor people, marginalized people, people who are hungry? The city of Delhi, which has the highest per capita income in the country, more than 2 lakh per month, that people still in Delhi need, 40% of people need government support to fend for themselves. By the government data, the same government data that say that they distribute free ration to 40% of people. Why we provide? Because they, in the considered opinion of the governance structure, these families are not capable of fending for themselves. They need support. That's why we support. So the question is, there would be always a binary. So basis on the physical processes or the social categories, you choose it, or on basis of, say, tourism or any particular kind of say narrative. Like we know the city is of Thag, city is of Ekka, Tange ka shahar hai. You will ask people, will say, हाँ वो Ekka से जानते हैं. So these are the identities markers. Which marker that we choose on a particular day depend on the vantage point on which you stand. I will show you some of the videos now. Just listen to the video and then we will discuss. Can we play it? No, I can play.
Man-made and natural. Why is man-made? Why can it be people-made? And why is it human-made? Because aren't women breathing the arms of power or something? Why? All men. All men. Aren't all women? All men are created people. Why aren't women created people too? So I think why only all people are created people? And also why is it man-made? Aren't women allowed to build stuff? Man-made?
We can move.
Oh, nice.
Next. Yeah. So, I will come back to that video because there are two more videos and then I will explain why I have picked up those. So if you look at there are biases, which I call it unconscious bias. None of us will agree that we are biased. Everybody wants to claim that they are not biased. Like I'm not biased. I would like to say that we all are biased. We do have our biases. Whether you do nuclear physics or you do psychology or you do religion or you do philosophy, all of us have biases. These are some of the biases that I'm saying. I'm just trying to document. And that's what is called unconscious bias. It's not that we are biased by choice. It's not that you are that is discrimination. Please understand there is a discrimination and bias are separate. We could be biased. You can like something. You may not like something. That doesn't mean you do not give equal treatment to those who like and you do not give equal treatment to those who do not like. That is discrimination. I'm not talking about that. That's what I'm saying, talking about unconscious bias, which could be on the basis of affinity. I know somebody. So I know that he or she is the best. I did not get a chance to know somebody who is actually better than the best. I did not get the chance. So I give recommendation that this is the best choice for you. Affinity bias. Attribution bias. You attribute something, some of the feature or characteristic to something, somebody, some institutions, individual, whichever that it is. Definitely beauty bias. That's a famous saying, beauty lies in the eyes of beholder, but you look at the matrimonials. And you know what is beauty bias. People have their own, irrespective of the society, culture, forget about it. I'm not saying that in a particular region, religion or country, it is happening across the globe. That is why it is called beauty bias. Age, gender, name, weight, they all have biases. Now, you have the three contexts through the videos. The first one where a child is contesting the textbook. Man creates. It has been quite a contestation and that why I'm saying that. Let's understand these three. After showing the third video, it's clear that what it is. In terms of Admi today. But if you, until that song comes, if you see the songs of 50s, 60s, where it says that Admi hu Admi se pyar karta hu. There the man was contrasted with animal. But now, the Admi is contrasted with, which is a problem in terms of the language and its evolution, the contextualization of knowledge. It has been a long way that one would argue that when we talk about the men in the books of 50s, man-environment relationship, it was considered, but yes, there was a problem in the Cartesian philosophy or a Christian theology. Because in Christian theology, church used to announce man and wife. There was a problem in that. So the man defined something. But if you use the Hindi term, आदमी, आदमी का उल्टा जानवर है, पुरुष, महिला. So आदमी used to be considered as इंसान. But now, when this second song you see, which actually talks about the beyond the heteronormativity, and it talks about the homosexual possibilities, the condition that Admi is now getting changed. So now if when you are using Admi, that means you are referring to man and not women. So now the bias, that's why I'm saying that the bias is also time contextual. The vocabulary that may not be having a bias a decade ago might be having full of certain biases today, or vice versa. So when we talk about, like I'm saying that because we talked about gender bias or age bias. What is age bias? Why people should be age bias or why people should be gender bias? Should we have that bias? Because it's easy to say than practice. And why I'm discussing this with you within this, because when you go to the field and map the street, first thing that I'm sure that you will be trained by, definitely you have a good team with full faith in Sarfraz and his ability as a colleague, as a scholar, as a friend. But I still would say, first thing you do tomorrow morning when you are standing in the street, identify all your biases. And then start your walk, you will have a better evening. Because at the end of the day, and then now I've been telling you that what are the types of biases that we all encounter. One that is here is a confirmation bias. All of us want to say the word which others agree. Whether they are the leaders, whether they are the scholars. Why? Because you want the people to clap. Why will you clap if you did not like what I'm saying? There is a least possibility of having a critical clap. So I would say the things that you would appreciate. That's what this is, a confirmation bias. Tendency to process information by looking for or interpreting information that is consistent with our existing belief. So you will see 50 things, but you will pick up A and not the B. I'm telling you when I come back to Banaras, that's why I'm saying so. Can I use this? No, I can use it. Don't worry. Now,
Is
this
it
one,
working?
right? I think so.
No, it's not. That's why.
Oh, okay. Sorry. The another one, what we call is a conformity bias. So that is the tendency people have to behave those around them, rather than using their own personal judgment. Again, for tomorrow you will have 2-3 mentors, including some of us who are the resource persons. Please try to see it independent of anything that you are guided to. You may bring up something which we may not have thought. But do not get carried with conformity bias. Don't think best prize तो उसी को मिलेगा जो वो आइडिया खोज के लाएगा जो सरफराज सर सोचे होंगे. ये हो सकता है, लेकिन that reality is not there. There could be a reality which may not get a prize, but might contribute to the understanding of that region later. We are not sure about it. So that's the second which we call it. The second thing is conformity bias. Please continue. Yeah. The third, what we call is the hindsight bias. That's a tendency upon learning an outcome. That's the most common amongst us, amongst Indians. All of us are driven by this, what we call the hindsight bias. That is in a sort of form we call, हमने कहा था. Something goes wrong, हमने कहा था. Something becomes good, हमने कहा था. Hell with you. How can you say both the things? But you will always find half the people on either side. And it could have any range of things. I know people, sometimes it is in fun, sometimes it otherwise. Basically what we call the tendency upon learning an outcome of an event, an experiment, a sporting event, कौन जीतेगा? हमको पता था हार ही जाएगा. For the kids, scored better, हमें पता था अच्छा करेगा. Scores poorly, हमें पता था ये कुछ नहीं कर सकती है. How? अगर पता था तो आपको बेहतर मेहनत करनी थी. You should have put better effort. That is what we call it. So now it comes to the why there are biases. There are three possibilities that. One is information bias. You get the information which itself is biased. Definitely selection bias, which again take you back to confirmation bias. Like you process those information which you are driven by. Like you have come from a particular cultural background, particular rural background, particular caste family. The practices that in your family you find is the best practice. Somebody else does it differently, you say ये तो खराब आदमी है. Not because you are discriminating that person. No. That again I would like to reiterate, when I say bias, it is different from the discrimination. You may not discriminate, but your face will have expressions. Good enough. You know what you are doing. So that is called selection bias, because your information bias leads to selection bias, and then it all together become confounding bias. That's something that we will be actually when we look at that. So that's when we go back to the identity. When you look at the identity, when you exclude or include something, when we talk about the exclusion inclusion based on identity, then what is that what are the biases that we pick up? When you write about a city, when you write about a neighborhood, when you write about good and bad about a street, when you write about good and bad about a particular transport network, what are the biases? It might seem that there are no biases, but please try to find out the biases while you read the literature, when you read the research papers. That's also in a way we call that researcher's vantage point. Is the researcher's vantage point is guided by the biases? It may not be. It may be. Unconscious bias, it can crop up anywhere that one can look at. So the processes, if you look at it, could be evolutionary process of having an identity in a particular region. Like weaving. It's an evolutionary process, but at the same time it was a political decision. Way back in 1800, around 1820 to 1860, to make these weavers settle in the city. So there are political decisions which create a particular identity. Like for example, the Ramlila of Ramnagar. That's a political outcome. If the British did not, say, defeat the Raja, then the king Raja Chet Singh, the Ramlila would be happening on the Ganga Ghat, at the Chet Singh Ghat. Now we have a new king, they had to go to the other side of the river. Ramlila of Ramnagar becomes famous. It is a royal patronage, definitely the grandest scale. It's not that good or bad. Please, let's get out of this good and bad business. The realities are unfolding, it is complex, it is beyond good and bad. How it has evolved is something that we need to understand. If you want to read, you can read Bernard Cohen. That's the best that one can tell you about reading that how these different practices and within the royalty and then the commissionerate has evolved in Banaras, and how the identities of different regions has come up over a period of time. If you look at the Banaras as identity space or multiple materiality within Banaras, as I talked to you about it, the different kind of practices in terms of multiple food practices, multiple languages. Why multiple languages? Why people from Karnataka, then Madhya Pradesh, from Bihar, Darbhanga, Maharaj, all have come and settled in Banaras? Why have they decided at a particular point of time between 1761 until 1947 that all have come? Please read about it. It's a historical decision of the then British Empire. after Permanent Land Settlement Act, that those princely estates who were captured, they were given a place to live here, because they thought if they live here, they will wait for themselves to die rather than going back and reclaiming their thrones. So the historical political decisions has to be contextualized in formation of the identity. If you see the city, every state at that point of time, including Kuch Bihar, they also have a place in the big, area, territory for themselves. What I'm basically trying you to understand, that if you look at the identity, that the history of migration within the city, when the people, one person come, the second person come, the language barrier, you did not have the AI at that point of time, that AI will translate for you from Russian to German and German to French and French to English, and you can communicate. How do they communicate when they come for the religious purposes? So they have somebody here. And once somebody is here, they will have their family. The family grows from 1 to 2 to 5 to 50. They themselves become a community. And that's the reason that you have all the communities here who can negotiate between the languages. These are the processes. So these are the process-based identity. The materiality is there. These are the material requirement of the people to have it. That's come to the last point where I bring back the sacred, which I started in the title. This also, when we do this, there is a process of othering. Like Banaras. Morning they talked about multiple religions in Banaras, but two were conspicuously missing. Kabir and Ravidas. Without talking about Kabir and Ravidas, the idea of city is infructuous. Both of them have lived, practiced their life, the theological preachings, and today they are well-defined religions. Kabir Panthis and Ravidasyas. Doesn't matter what skin, doesn't matter how many numbers, then many religions would not exist today, because they might have only 50 people practicing, or maybe 500, or maybe 5,000. They do exist. The city does have the space for them also. In heart of your city, right close to that main shrine, you have Kabir Math. So what basically is, that's the process of othering. But please understand what I'm saying. I'm taking sacred as a conceptual category and not as a practice for Banaras. So sacred, the moment there is something is sacred, that is othering is done. If there is something which is not sacred, that is why sacred exists. Go back and say, man exists because there are animals. You distinguish. That is a binary. So the sacred, if the binary is sacred, there is something which is not sacred. You have sacred animals, you have sacred plants, you have sacred spaces for different communities across the world. But for the same community, there is something which is not sacred. That is what we call othering. If you take the category of Darida, you will see othering. Yeah. So if you look at the perspective, so Banaras, usually there is a traditional urban spaces, as I told you, the morphological category and functional category, the cities are classified as dominant identity. So you have one identity for a city. Somehow Banaras would be, it depends that how one would like to take, but also has a singular identity. But can we take sacred identity? Because this place is sacred for more than one faith. Morning they have talked about Hinduism, Islam, Jainism, Buddhism, they all have their own spaces designed. Kabir Panthis, Ravidasya, you name it. They have all are sacred. But that comes to it, why with the title that I was talking about. So the sacred, that's why I said that by design it is exclusionary. Something which is sacred will have a binary opposite. That's something which is not sacred. By practice, you do a particular function, you take off your shoes. Sacred, not so sacred. Anything. not confined to one particular religion. Do not get confused with a particular religion or a particular practice. Sacred by a conceptual category, by design, is exclusionary. Because that is coming as what you call profane or not sacred. And that brings us to the second category that we call heterotopia. In the morning, somebody was asking question to my colleague, how real, how not real. And that what is the category that's the title which you will find sometime definitely, because that title would come, heterotopia in making. Heterotopia is what? If you go to the Foucault's category, because what he basically starts this word and then people use, that's somewhere that reality and myth get subsumed into one. And I take two just to make you understand. The Ganga and the death. Both are real, both are mythical. Like Ganga, it flows. We see it is a river. The geographers know the process of its origin. You know there is a glacier. Amount of melting of glacier determine the velocity in the river. Does it stop here? No, it doesn't. Ganga remains celestial, ideal. जिसे राजा सगर ने अपने पूर्वजों का संस्कार करने के लिए जमीन पे उतारा. Now if Ganga says something, can we say it is not true or it is untrue? I have written at one point of time. People in Banaras, living all across the river Ganga, they know the meaning, they know the metaphors. That is, both real and myth subsume into one. That's the identity that it has. Similarly, death. I'm sure that William Perry's book, Death in Banaras, you might have read. Those of you who are interested can read it further again and again. Every time you read, you find something different that he argues. Death is real. But after death, there is a ritual, which is in faith that it will allow people for salvation या मोक्ष. और अगर आप मरिकरिका पे दाह संस्कार करते हैं तो वो जन्म मृत्यु के चक्र से मुक्त हो जाएंगे. Can we verify? Can we deny? Neither. Person died? Real. Association? Myth. They are subsumed into one. The Banaras is also considered as a city of death. And interestingly, the city doesn't have one place of death. You have two burning ghats, the Harishchand and Marikanika. The story, आपने सुबह सुबह यहाँ कुलगीत में गाया. I hope you remember the words. बिके हरिश्चंद्र थे यहीं पे. ये सत्य शिक्षा की राजधानी. For what he sold himself? For the truth. If that's the truth, the other ghat, which is also a burning ghat, these are two spaces doing a similar thing, the death rituals. They have their own faith, their own narratives to continue. But that's what I'm saying, that this is what the heterotopia actually would look like when we look in Indian context. The Foucauldian heterotopia is a different heterotopia, but in terms of the substantive level, they subsume the reality and the myth into a particular framework. Can I go to the next? Yeah. And this is what is a list. It's only half. So the city, if you look at Banaras, whichever you choose, the city becomes yours. It could be the city of Shiva, city of salvation, I told you, death, city of light, Dinah X book. The light has a different, Kasi, the word has a different interpretation. It has come from a word Kas, फूले का सकनमय छाई जनु वर्षा कृत प्रकट बुधाई. जो लोग तुलसीदास पढ़े हैं वो कहते हैं कि जब कास के वृक्ष में जब सफेद फूल आते हैं तो लगता है वर्षा बूढ़ी हो रही है. वो कास के वृक्ष से इसका नाम काशी हुआ है. Across the river that grass used to be there, and that the word that Kasi comes. But then if you read those Shiv Puran and others, there is something called Kasi Khand. And if you read that, they have their own stories. None of it I'm saying with which you should take. That's why it is heterotopia in making. What we've been established, we still remains open for that. Definitely the city of learning and teaching, you have the, I'm not getting into that. City of chaos, Sarv Vidya ki Rajdhani aapne kaha, city of learning. Learning will have to be teaching, teaching cannot be without learning, so it has to be together. City of chaos, that's one of the most common understanding about Banaras when the people from outside write about it. Definitely the oldest living city, city of narrow street, city on Ganga, and you keep on adding center of the earth like Jerusalem. There are multiple centers of the earth. I'm not sure which one is the real, which one is not so real. But I would say every religion, every faith has a right to consider center wherever they want to. It becomes their center. It doesn't disallow anybody else to do otherwise. And that's why I say the sacredness is contextual. And in only context with exclusionary profane. So for somebody Jerusalem is sacred, for somebody Kashi is sacred, for somebody Ujjain is sacred, for somebody and something else is sacred. It should always be open for it. So then I will now come to an end, because I know that Professor Sarfraz has seen his mobile twice for that is an understanding. I have taken more than half an hour. I will conclude. The arguments are, basically this is what I wanted to argue. That when you look at the city, when you look at the street, the best way to look at is develop your own perspective, which may not be confounding with any other perspective. But that doesn't mean that you will start imagining it something which is not there. Because then you will be beyond heterotopia. Heterotopia will have to have something real and then imagined. Imagined by people before you. Otherwise then it will become something else which we are not really able to say determine today that what it becomes. But then the process that you will look at, it's never new, it's not sudden, it's absolutely a political project. Whichever that place that you look at on the earth, identity formation is a political process. A state is an equal partner. Can we go to the next one? Yes, yeah. So if we look at that, no, that's, I have already discussed the dominant identity. That's, yeah. Banaras also I will pass it on. Yeah. Wait, here. That's it. So if you look at this, there's an old book for Mumford, and I have quoted it for two basic things that I need to highlight here. One is a space and time. That if you look at the space and time, and that's why I say that biases are also contextual to space and time. To understand about a city, it is bounded by the space and time. And then the second thing, if you look at the space were categorized of mind long before the mathematical discoveries that they were conceivable in a rational form of space other than from the described by the fluid, which is basically the mankind that has acted on this premise. So the space, when you look at in terms of the measurement that you will do, it's not only in terms of the measurement. First you conceptualize in your head. Like if you imagine, today you will go, tomorrow you will go and map the street. But please imagine for the people who have created those streets. There was somebody, right? It's not that the first on the streets were laid down and then people were said, oh come, now you stay here. It is an evolutionary city. If you remember the first part, I say it's an evolutionary city. So when the city evolves, the space comes first in your mind. Then you operationalize it in a geometrical coordinates. And then you actually conceive it as a scholar, as a second-time researcher. So, yeah, so that's the last thing I have to say. The state, if you look at, state is always an instrument. A state means the governance structure. A state is always a governance structure. It's not a nation. A state is a governance structure. If you look at the governance structure, that gets determined by the international culture, tourist market, so what people want. You want to create that. So you want to create Kyoto, you want to create Switzerland, you want to create any number of that parallel that you want to. Why you want to create that? Because those spaces are already attained certain status, quote unquote, in the minds of those who are tourists. So you want to replicate to invite tourists. It's an economy, out and out. That is why the materiality is important. So if you look at that, so Neo-Orientalist, if you see, so the Banaras always is constructed, disseminated and appropriated. Because it is not one Banaras. There would be always multiple Banaras. The Banaras of Siddhartha, he was Siddhartha before he gave the sermon. After the sermon, he becomes Gautam Buddha. He was still Siddhartha. So the Banaras of Siddhartha would be different than the Banaras of priests. The Banaras of Kabir Panthis would be different than Banaras of Ravidasyas. The Banaras of Jain Munis would be different than the Banaras of foreign tourists. But we have all in one frame. When you will do the mapping tomorrow, how much you will be able to incorporate? I will stop it here. Any questions? We will have it. Thank you.